phone rings, you answer, and the voice on the other end is crying, panicked, and it's unmistakably your daughter. The exact pitch of her voice, the exact way she says your name when she's scared. Your hands are already shaking before she even finishes her first full sentence, and she's telling you she's been in an accident. She's hurt. She needs money right now, and every single instinct in your body screams to help immediately, and that's exactly the moment scammers are counting on, because that voice, the one that sounded so completely, unmistakably real, wasn't your daughter at all. It was artificial intelligence, built from a handful of seconds of her actual voice pulled from a video she posted online months earlier. And stories exactly like this one are happening to real families right now, at a scale that's genuinely alarming. And in this video, I want to walk you through exactly how this scam actually works from the inside. Why? It's spreading so fast, and the specific practical steps you can take today to make sure it never works on you or the people you love. So let's start with understanding exactly how a scammer builds a fake version of someone's voice in the first place. Because once you actually see the mechanics laid bare, it becomes considerably less mysterious and considerably more preventable. Modern AI voice cloning tools, several of which are genuinely free and openly available, only need a tiny sample of someone's actual voice to work. We're talking as little as 3 to 10 seconds of clear audio, and think for a second about how many places that kind of audio sample could realistically come from. A TikTok video, an Instagram reel, a YouTube comment reply, a public voicemail greeting, a video posted for a birthday, a graduation, a wedding, literally any moment where someone's actual voice was recorded and shared publicly online. And scammers don't need a long, detailed recording either. They just need enough of a sample for the AI model to learn the underlying characteristics of that specific voice, pitch, tone, rhythm, particular verbal habits. And once that model is trained, it can generate entirely new sentences, words that person never actually said, in a voice that sounds convincingly, sometimes indistinguishably, like them. And here's the part that should genuinely concern you. The accuracy of these tools has become remarkable. Researchers and cybersecurity firms tracking this space have reported that some current open source voice cloning models can produce a usable clone with accuracy exceeding 95% from just a few seconds of source audio. And unlike a few years ago, when synthetic voices tended to sound slightly robotic or flat if you listened closely, today's tools can also replicate emotional inflection, breathing patterns, and speech mannerisms, meaning a cloned voice doesn't just sound like the right person, it can sound like that person's specifically scared, or specifically panicked, or specifically crying, which is exactly the emotional state that makes a listener stop thinking critically and start reacting purely on instinct. And it's genuinely worth understanding just how accessible these specific tools have become, because this isn't some rare, specialized capability locked away behind expensive, hard-to-obtain software available only to sophisticated criminal organizations. Several open-source voice cloning models with names like XTTS v2 and F5TTS are freely available online, requiring no payment and relatively minimal technical skill to actually operate, meaning the barrier to entry for this specific kind of fraud has dropped dramatically over just the past couple of years. What once required genuine technical expertise and specialized expensive equipment can now be done by, essentially, anyone with a laptop and a few minutes of setup time. And that democratization of the underlying technology is a huge part of why this specific scam has scaled so rapidly and so widely across the country in such a short period, rather than remaining a rare, isolated occurrence. And I want to be genuinely clear about the actual scale of this problem, because the numbers here are worth sitting with rather than glossing over. Multiple industry reports tracking this specific threat throughout 2026 have found that somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 4 adults have either directly experienced an AI voice scam attempt or know someone close to them who has. And the Federal Trade Commission alone logged roughly 250,000 complaints related to AI voice scams in just the first quarter of 2026. And multiple fraud researchers tracking this specific category have separately found that voice phishing attacks broadly, sometimes called vishing, surged by several 100% year over year as AI tools became cheaper, faster, and easier to access. And estimates on total financial losses vary, depending on the specific source and methodology. But multiple independent trackers place losses attributable to AI voice scams targeting elderly Americans specifically well into the billions of dollars for 2026 alone. And here's a detail that genuinely matters, and that a lot of coverage of this topic tends to skip over. Researchers studying victim reporting behavior consistently find that it's only a small fraction of actual victims. Some estimates put it as low as 15% ever formally report what happened to them, often because of embarrassment or shame, meaning the real scale of this problem is very likely considerably larger than even these already alarming official numbers suggest. And I want to share one specific documented case because it genuinely illustrates just how convincing this has become, even for people who consider themselves careful and alert. In May of 2026, a woman in Missoula, Montana, received a call from what sounded exactly like her own daughter, crying, terrified, saying she'd been in an accident and needed money immediately. And the mother later described it simply, saying she recognized her daughter's specific scared cry, the exact sound, not just the general voice, and she nearly wired several $1,000s before something made her pause just long enough to call her daughter's workplace directly. And she found her daughter sitting safely at her own desk, completely unaware anything had even happened. And I think that specific detail, recognizing not just a voice but a specific emotional inflection, a scared cry, is genuinely worth sitting with, because it shows exactly how far this technology has actually advanced. And I think understanding why victims feel that shame is genuinely important, too, because it's worth saying plainly, falling for a scam exactly like this one is not a failure of intelligence, and it's not a sign that someone is naive or careless. It's the entirely predictable, expected human response to what security researchers describe as a weaponized psychological attack, specifically engineered to trigger panic and bypass rational thought before a person has any real chance to stop and question what's happening. And I want to walk you through exactly what a typical version of this scam actually sounds like, because recognizing the pattern is genuinely one of your best defenses. The call usually opens with urgency and distress, a voice that sounds like your child, grandchild, sibling, or close family member, sounding frightened, hurt, or in some kind of trouble. A car accident, an arrest, a medical emergency, something serious enough to justify not thinking clearly. And very often, a second voice joins the call shortly afterward. Someone claiming to be a police officer, a lawyer, a doctor, or a bail bondsman. Someone positioned as an authority figure, specifically there to add credibility and additional pressure. And this is a deliberate, well-documented manipulation tactic because a second voice essentially corroborates the first, making the entire scenario feel more procedurally real and less like something you'd naturally suspect as fake. And the caller will almost always specifically instruct you to keep the situation secret from other family members, framing it as protecting the supposed victim's privacy or avoiding embarrassment, when the actual function of that instruction is to prevent you from calling anyone else who might immediately recognize the scam or simply confirm your family member is actually safe. And the caller will typically insist on staying on the line with you the entire time, sometimes explicitly directing you to drive to a specific bank or store while remaining on the phone, which serves two purposes at once. It keeps you isolated and continuously under pressure, and it prevents you from having a quiet moment to actually think clearly or call anyone else for a reality check. And the request for money itself is almost always something urgent and specifically hard to reverse once sent. A wire transfer, a cryptocurrency payment, or gift cards. And it's genuinely worth understanding why scammers specifically favor those three payment methods over more traceable ones because, unlike a credit card charge, all three of those payment types are extremely difficult and often functionally impossible to actually reverse or trace back to the person who received the money. Well, once that money is gone, it's very often gone permanently. And there's one more layer to how sophisticated this specific scam has become that's genuinely worth understanding. Caller ID spoofing, meaning scammers can make an incoming call, display a phone number that looks exactly like your actual family member's real number or a legitimate-looking local number. So even glancing down at your screen and seeing what appears to be a familiar name or number isn't actually reliable verification anymore either. And I want to be honest that this combination, a genuinely convincing cloned voice, a corroborating second caller, deliberate isolation from other family members, extreme time pressure, an irreversible payment method, and a spoofed caller ID adds up to a genuinely sophisticated, multi-layered manipulation. And that's exactly why the honest, most useful framing here isn't simply try to be more careful, because plenty of smart, careful, technologically literate people have still fallen for exactly this scam. The honest framing is that you genuinely cannot rely on your own ears alone anymore to verify who you're actually talking to, no matter how confident you feel in your own ability to detect something fake. And that's precisely why the single most effective defense against this entire category of scam isn't a piece of software or an app at all. It's something considerably simpler, and I want to walk you through it properly because it genuinely works. It's called a safe word, or sometimes a safe phrase, and here's exactly how you actually set one up. Sit down with your immediate family, your parents, your children, your siblings, anyone you genuinely want to help immediately in a real emergency, and agree together on a specific word or short phrase that has no connection whatsoever to information any of you have ever posted publicly online, something nobody could reasonably guess or find by searching your social media. And the actual rule going forward is simple and absolute. If you ever receive a distressing, urgent call from someone claiming to be that person, and they cannot correctly provide that specific safe word when asked, you treat the call as fraudulent immediately and hang up. Not a practical ask for most people living ordinary connected lives today, but it is genuinely worth reviewing your own social media privacy settings, particularly for any accounts posting voice or video content, and considering whether everything really needs to be fully public rather than restricted to friends or followers. You actually know personally, since research tracking this specific threat has found that people who share voice or video content publicly are measurably more likely to actually become targets in the first place, simply because they've made the raw material a scammer needs more readily available and easier to find. And beyond the safe word specifically, there are several additional, genuinely practical habits worth building into. How your family handles these calls generally. First, and this is honestly one of the simplest, most effective techniques available, deliberately slow the call down the moment something feels off. Scammers script these calls, specifically around urgency, because urgency is what short-circuits careful, rational thinking. So if a call feels rushed or panicked, say something simple like, "Let me grab a pen," take even just 30 seconds of pause, that small break is often enough to let your own rational thinking catch back up with your emotional reaction. Second, ask a specific question that couldn't possibly be answered using publicly available information, not something generic like, "What's our dog's name?" since that kind of detail is very often sitting right there on a public social media profile, but something considerably more specific and private, referencing a recent conversation, a specific shared memory, something no scammer scraping public content could realistically know in advance. Third, and this is genuinely one of the most important steps of all, hang up and call the person back directly using a phone number you already have saved from before this call, never a number the caller gives you, or the number that just called you, even if it looks correct on your screen, because remember, caller ID can be spoofed entirely, calling back on a number you already trust. And control is the only way to genuinely verify who you're actually reaching. Fourth, if you can't immediately reach that specific family member directly, try reaching another relative or close friend who might reasonably know their current location or situation. A scam. All right, counting on your isolation loses considerable power the moment a second trusted person gets involved and starts asking their own questions. And fifth, resist any pressure to stay on the line while completing a payment. A legitimate emergency simply does not require you to remain continuously on a phone call while driving to a specific store or bank to purchase gift cards or complete a wire transfer. That specific combination of instructions is one of the single strongest red flags of this entire scam. And I think it's also genuinely worth talking specifically about who tends to be targeted most heavily, because that context helps you know exactly where to focus your own family's specific preparation efforts. Older adults and retirees are disproportionately targeted, and security researchers point to a few specific, understandable reasons why older generations are often less familiar with exactly how far AI voice technology has actually advanced. Meaning a convincingly cloned voice feels considerably more unbelievable as fake to them than it might to someone who's grown up already skeptical of digital content generally. And older adults are also statistically more likely to have accumulated retirement savings that make them a genuinely more lucrative target for scammers, optimizing for the biggest possible payout per successful call. And this is exactly why having this specific safe word conversation directly and proactively with older family members, well before any actual emergency call ever comes in, is genuinely one of the single most valuable things you can do this week. Not sometime vaguely in the future, but literally this week, because the entire strategy only works if it's already firmly in place before a scammer ever calls. Trying to explain and establish a safe word for the very first time in the middle of an actual panicked, high-pressure call defeats the entire purpose. And it's worth thinking specifically about how to actually have this conversation with an older relative in a way that lands well, rather than coming across as alarmist or condescending. Framing it around a real documented case, like the Montana story we just walked through, tends to work far better than a vague, abstract warning, because it gives the entire concept something concrete and relatable to actually attach to. And it's worth explaining the underlying mechanism honestly, too, that this isn't about their own judgment being somehow untrustworthy. It's about a specific piece of technology that genuinely didn't exist in a widely accessible form even a couple of years ago, meaning nobody's outdated instincts are actually at fault here. Everyone alive today is essentially encountering this exact threat for the very first time together, and framing it that way as a shared, genuinely new challenge rather than a personal vulnerability specific to older family members tends to make the entire conversation feel considerably more collaborative and considerably less like a lecture. And it's also genuinely worth understanding a broader related pattern here, because family emergency scams aren't the only version of this threat currently circulating. Businesses are being targeted too, with scammers cloning the voices of company executives specifically to authorize fraudulent wire transfers, sometimes for extraordinarily large sums of money, and this specific variant follows a genuinely similar playbook to the family emergency version. An employee, often someone in finance or accounting with direct authority to move company funds, receives an urgent call or voicemail that sounds exactly like their CEO or another senior executive demanding an immediate confidential wire transfer, often framed around a time-sensitive business deal or an urgent sensitive situation that supposedly can't wait for normal approval processes. And the same core psychological pressure applies here too: urgency, authority, and a strong discouragement from checking with anyone else before acting, and reports tracking this specific category have found average losses per successful incident reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for these business-focused attacks, dramatically higher per incident than the family emergency version, precisely because corporate wire transfers typically involve considerably larger sums of money than an individual family would ever realistically send at once. And reports have described organizations losing an average of many millions of dollars annually to this specific category of voice-based fraud. And if you happen to work somewhere with any kind of financial authorization responsibility, it's genuinely worth checking whether your own workplace has any verification protocol in place for large or unusual transfer requests that come in exclusively over the phone, because the same fundamental vulnerability, trusting a familiar sounding voice without any additional independent verification, applies just as directly in a corporate context as it does within a family. And I want to spend a moment on what to actually do if you or someone in your family has already fallen victim to exactly this kind of scam, because acting quickly genuinely does matter here. First, contact your bank or financial institution immediately, and specifically ask about the possibility of reversing or freezing a wire transfer. And while success isn't guaranteed at all, especially depending on how much time has already passed, financial institutions do have specific procedures for exactly this kind of fraud, and acting fast genuinely improves your odds meaningfully. Second, report the incident directly to the Federal Trade Commission through reportfraud.ftc.gov, and separately file a complaint with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. And I know reporting can feel embarrassing, but remember what we discussed earlier: underreporting is genuinely one of the biggest reasons this problem keeps growing, largely unchecked. And every single report filed helps investigators build a clearer, more accurate picture of these fraud networks and how they're actually operating, including which specific phone numbers, payment routing details, and voice generation patterns keep showing up across multiple separate cases, information that genuinely does feed into ongoing law enforcement investigations, even when an individual victim's own specific money is never fully recovered. So filing that report isn't just a formality, it's a genuinely meaningful contribution toward eventually disrupting these operations at a larger scale. Third, change any passwords or account details that may have been mentioned or discussed at any point during the actual call, since scammers frequently attempt to extract additional personal information beyond just the immediate payment itself. And fourth, and this part genuinely matters, tell your close family members what happened as soon as you reasonably can, because the exact same cloned voice or the exact same underlying scam script is very often reused specifically against other people connected to the very first victim. And a family that's already been warned in advance is considerably harder to successfully scam a second time using the same specific tactic. And before we get to that final thought, let's actually do a quick practical recap of everything we've walked through, because I want this video to leave you with something genuinely actionable. Rather than just a general sense of concern, set up a private safe word with your immediate family this week, one that's never been posted anywhere online. If you ever get a distressing, urgent call, deliberately slow things down before reacting. Even just 30 seconds genuinely helps. Ask a specific question that couldn't be answered from public information alone. Hang up and call the person back on a number you already have saved. Never the number that just called you. Loop in another trusted family member or friend. If you can't immediately reach the person directly, never stay on the line while being directed to complete a payment at a bank or store. And if the worst does happen, contact your bank immediately. Report it to the FTC and the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Change any passwords mentioned during the call and tell your family so the same scam can't be reused. D, against someone else you love, and I want to close with something genuinely important to actually sit with, because it's easy to walk away from a video like this, one feeling a bit more anxious about answering your own phone going forward. And I don't think that anxious reaction is actually the right, healthy takeaway here. The goal isn't to become permanently suspicious of every single phone call you ever receive for the rest of your life. The goal is simply to have one specific, genuinely reliable verification method already firmly in place before you ever actually need it. A safe word costs you absolutely nothing. It takes maybe 5 total minutes to properly set up with your family this week. And it works decisively against even the most technically sophisticated version of this entire scam, because no matter how convincingly real a cloned voice sounds, no matter how much emotional inflection or breathing pattern detail today's most advanced AI tools can now replicate, that AI still fundamentally cannot know a private word your family specifically chose and never shared anywhere online. And I think that's honestly one of the more reassuring, empowering things about this entire story. In a moment where AI genuinely can convincingly fake almost anything you can see or hear, one simple,